The chains made a sound Dalton would never forget when they hit the ground. Not the metallic clang he expected, but something softer like relief itself had a voice. Dawn was just breaking across the flatlands, painting everything the color of old blood, and the woman whose wrists he just freed looked at him with eyes that held no gratitude, only fury. Her voice came low and sharp, each word a blade. "I'd rather die than be yours." She said it like a promise, like a curse, like she meant every syllable. And in that moment, with her breath still coming hard and his hands still trembling from cutting through metal, Dalton Crane realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Not in freeing her, but in thinking freedom was his to give. The sun climbed higher, indifferent too. The tension stretched between them. Dalton stood there with the metal cutters still in his grip, watching her. Rubber wrists where the iron had left its mark. Dark lines against darker skin. She didn't thank him. Didn't even acknowledge what he'd done beyond that first brutal dismissal. "You're hurt," he said, because he didn't know what else to say. She glanced at him like he'd stated something obvious and insulting. You should leave, but he couldn't. Not yet. The camp around them told a story he was still piecing together. 3 bed rolls still warm. Wahid arrived. Supplies scattered like whoever had been here left in a hurry. A cooking fire that had burned, down to nothing hours ago, and her chained to a post driven deep into the hard-pan earth. "Who did this to you?" Kiona didn't answer. She was already moving, testing her legs, rolling her shoulders. There was something in the way she moved that made him aware of his own body in relation to hers. Careful, deliberate, like a language he'd forgotten he knew. "I can help you get back to your people." That made her stop. She turned and for the first time really looked at him. Not through him or past him, but at him. Her gaze traveled from his worn hat to the cartridge belt riding his hips, lingering there just long enough to make something tighten in his chest. "Your people already helped me once," she said. "That's how I ended. Up in chains." The words landed like accusations. Dalton felt them settle in his gut, heavy and uncomfortable. He wanted to say he wasn't like that he was different, that she could trust him. But she was already walking away, heading east toward the rising sun with nothing but the clothes she wore and rage to keep her warm. He watched her go, told himself to let her. She made her choice clear, but then she stumbled. Just slightly. A hitch in her stride that she tried to hide, tried to push through. Her hand went to her side, and he saw the dark stain there spreading slowly across the leather of her dress. She was bleeding, and she was walking, away from the only water source for miles. Dalton looked down at the chains on the ground, at the blood on the metal, where it had cut into her skin, looked at the abandoned camp and the tracks leading away from it, deep and panicked. In the dust. Whatever had happened here wasn't finished, and neither was she. He picked up his canteen and started walking. Not after her, not yet. Just in the same direction, keeping his distance, watching the way the morning light caught in her hair and the way she held herself like a blade even when she was breaking. She glanced back once. Her expression told him everything he needed to know. This was going to be a long day. The distance between them stayed exactly the same, 30 paces, no more, no less. Dalton kept it that way deliberately, like there was an invisible rope connecting them that neither could break. She didn't look back again, but he knew she was aware of him. The way her shoulders stayed rigid. The way her pace never varied despite the limp she was trying to hide. The sun had teeth now. It bit into exposed skin and turned the air thick enough to chew. He'd been walking in desert country long enough to know the signs of someone pushing too hard, the slight sway in her gait, the way she'd stopped sweating, which was worse than still sweating. "You need water," he called out. She didn't respond, didn't even slow down. Dalton unslung his canteen and picked up his pace. Not running. That would spook her, just closing the distance with a kind of steady inevitability that said he wasn't going anywhere. When he got within 10 paces, she wheeled on him. Her hand went to her side to a knife he hadn't noticed before. Bone handle worn smooth by use. "Stop," she said. He stopped, held up the canteen where she could see it. "Just water, nothing else. I don't want anything from you." Want and need aren't the same thing. Something flickered across her face then. Not gratitude, something sharper and more complicated. She looked at the canteen like it was a trap, which maybe it was. Maybe every kindness from a stranger was a trap in its own way. "Drink," he said, and tossed it to her. She caught it one-handed, reflexes fast as a snake strike. For a moment, she just held it, weighing options he couldn't see. Then she uncorked it and drank. The way she drank made something shift in Dalton's chest. There was nothing delicate about it. She tilted her head back and let the water pour, some of it spilling down her throat and across her collarbone. Desperate and beautiful and so alive it hurt to watch. When she finally lowered the canteen, she was breathing hard. Water droplets caught the light on her skin. "Enjoy the show?" she asked. And there was challenge in her voice like she'd caught him staring, which he had been. "I was making sure you didn't drink. At all. Liar." She tossed the canteen back. He caught it, felt the warmth, where her hands had been. "You're still bleeding," he said, nodding toward her side. "I've bled before. That wound needs cleaning, or it'll rot. Then I'll rot." The stubbornness in her voice would have been funny if it wasn't so likely to kill her. Dalton looked at the endless expanse of nothing around them. No shade for miles. No water except what he carried. The nearest settlement was 2 days' ride, and she was on foot. "Where exactly are you planning to go?" "Away from you. That's not a direction. It's the only one that matters." She started walking again, slower this time. The limp was more pronounced now. She was using the knife as a crutch, leaning on it every few steps when she thought he wasn't looking. Dalton followed. What else could he do? The sun kept climbing. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves that made the horizon look like water. Kiona's steps grew shorter, her breathing rougher. Once she swayed so hard he thought she'd go down, but she caught herself. Stubborn didn't begin to cover it. They walked like that for another hour, him following her, refusing to acknowledge his existence. The space between them filled with things neither could say. Then she stopped, just stopped walking and stood there, head down, shoulders heaving. Dalton waited, didn't move closer, didn't speak. When she finally looked back at him, there was something raw in her expression. Not surrender, but maybe recognition that pride had limits even she couldn't push past. "There's shade," she said, pointing to a rock formation in the distance. "We stopped there, not asking, not quite demanding. Something between." Dalton nodded. They turned toward the rocks together, still 30 paces apart, still circling each other like wolves, trying to decide if they were pack or prey, but moving in the same direction now. That had to count for something. The shade was barely enough for one person, let alone two. A narrow gap between two slabs of rock that leaned against each other like drunks holding each other upright. But it was shade, and out here that made it worth more than gold. Kiona reached it first and pressed herself against the coolest part of the stone. Her eyes closed. Relief flooded her features before she could hide it behind that wall of defiance she kept between them. Dalton stopped at the edge of the shadow. There wasn't room for both of them unless they sat close. Too close. "I'll wait out here," he said. She opened one eye. "That's stupid. Seems polite. Polite gets you heat stroke." She shifted slightly, making space. That wasn't really space at all. Seat. It wasn't an invitation, more like a practical observation that they both needed to survive the next few hours. And dead men weren't useful to anyone. Dalton settled into the narrow gap, his shoulder pressed against hers. She didn't move away, but he felt her stiffen at the contact. Every muscle in her body went tight as wire. The heat outside was a living thing, pressing down on the world with weight that made breathing work. Inside their small shelter, the air was still and close and filled with the smell of dust and sweat and something else. Something that made Dalton more aware of where his arm touched hers than he wanted to be. "How far to your people?" he asked, because the silence was becoming its own kind of pressure. "Far enough that you can't follow." "I'm not trying to follow." "Then why are you still here?" It was a fair question. He didn't have a good answer. The right thing would be to leave her the canteen, and right away. Let her make her own choices, her own mistakes. But the blood on her side said those mistakes might be fatal, and he'd seen enough death to last several lifetimes. "The men who chained you," he said instead of answering. "How many were there?" Kiona was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had edges he hadn't heard before. "3 traders moving through Apache land where they shouldn't have been. They saw me gathering water. Alone." She paused. "They thought I'd be easy to take, but you weren't." One of them learned that the hard way. Dalton didn't ask what that meant. He could imagine well enough. "They planned to sell me," she continued. "There are men who pay well for certain things. Women who look like me, who come from where I come from." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that made Dalton's hands curl into fists. Not at her, at the world that made such things possible. "But they're gone now," he said. The camp was empty. Something scared them. Something in the night. They left everything and ran. She turned her head, slightly enough that he could see her profile, including me. "Lucky, was it?" Her voice held something bitter. "Or am I just a different kind of trap now?" The question landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Dalton became suddenly intensely aware of how small this space was, how their legs were almost touching, how he could feel the heat radiating from her body, different from the heat of the sun, deeper, more dangerous. "You think I'm keeping you prisoner," he said. "Aren't you? You can leave any time." "Can I?" She shifted, turning to face him more directly. The movement brought them closer. "You follow me. You offer water I need. You point out wounds I have. Every kindness is another chain." Her face was inches from his now, close enough that he could see the faint pattern of scars on her cheek. Ceremonial marks that held, meaning he didn't understand. Close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Close enough to feel her breath. When she spoke, "This is different," he said, though his voice came out rougher than intended. How? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had too many answers and none of them were things he could say out loud. Like how looking at her made him forget why he'd been wandering alone. Like how the way she stood her ground against him made him want to see how far that strength went. Like how the thought of her walking away into nothing bothered him more than it should. "I don't want to own you," he finally said. "Then what do you want?" The question was a trap. Or maybe it was an honest thing, disguised as a trap. Kiona was watching him with an expression he couldn't read, waiting for an answer he didn't know how to give. Before he could speak, she moved, pulled back just enough to break the spell of proximity. The space between them became breathable again. "The sun will be lower in a few hours," she said, voice carefully neutral. "We can move then." "We," she'd said. "We." Dalton nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat there in the shade, not touching, but not separate either. The heat pressed down. Time moved slow as honey. And between them, something unnamed and unwanted continued to grow. The sun was falling toward the horizon when Dalton saw how much blood she'd lost. Not all at once, just a steady seep that had darkened the side of her, dress from ribs to hip. She'd been hiding it well, but when she stood to leave their shelter, she swayed and caught herself against a rock. "That needs cleaning," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. I can smell it going bad from here." That was a lie, but not much of one. The wound had been open too long and too much heat. If infection set in out here, she'd be dead in days. Kiona turned to look at him. Something in her. I said she knew it, too. Knew she was running out of choices that didn't end badly. I have water and cloth, Dalton said. That's all. Nothing else. Nothing else. She repeated like she was testing. The words for traps. Nothing else, he confirmed. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and final, turned her back to him, and began working at the ties of her dress with fingers that shook slightly, not from fear, from weakness. Wait, Dalton said. His own hands weren't much steadier as he dampened a strip of cloth from his pack. Let me. When he touched the leather ties, his knuckles brushed against her spine. She went rigid. He froze. I'm just loosening it, he said, quietly, so I can see. She nodded but didn't relax. He worked slowly, carefully pulling the dress away from the wound. It had stuck to dried blood, and when it came free, fresh red welled up. The gash ran from her lower ribs down across her hip, deep enough to scar, deep enough to be serious. Who did this? He asked. Does it matter? It matters to me. Kiona looked back over her shoulder. Their faces were close again, but different from before. This proximity had purpose and permission, which somehow made it more dangerous. One of the traitors, she finally said. When I fought back, Dalton felt anger settle into his bones. Like cold water. He'd seen wounds like this before. Knew what kind of man left marks like that on a woman who said, No, good, he said. Good that you fought back. Something shifted in her. Expression. Not quite softness, but maybe the edge of it like she'd expected judgment and got something else. Instead, he began cleaning the wound. His hand was shaking now, and there was no hiding it. Every time he touched her skin, he felt the tremor run through his fingers. Felt the warmth of her, the smoothness of skin that had never known. The kind of life he'd lived. You're shaking, she said. I know. Why? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Because I don't want to hurt you, he said, which was true, but not the whole truth. Liar. He paused, cloth pressed against her ribs. What? You shake because you want to touch me. She said it matter of fact, like pointing out weather. And you hate that. You want it. The words hit like a fist. Dalton couldn't deny them, couldn't defend against them. She'd seen right through him to something he hadn't wanted to admit to himself. I'm trying to help you, he said. I know. She was still looking back at him, eyes dark and knowing. That's what makes it worse. They stayed like that. Him with his hand against her skin, trembling. Her watching him with an expression that held no pity, no anger, just recognition of something neither of them wanted and both of them felt. Finish, she finally said, turning away before the light. Goes. He finished, wrapped the wound with clean cloth, tried not to notice how soft her skin was under his rough hands, tried not to think about the curve of her waist or the way she breathed deeper when his fingers grazed certain places. When he was done, she pulled her dress back up without looking at him. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she'd thanked him for anything. Dalton nodded, not trusting his voice. They left the shelter as the sun painted the sky red and gold, walked in silence toward a line of low hills in the distance. The space between them was still 30 paces, but it felt smaller now, like they were connected by something more than just the accident of being in the same nowhere together. Behind them, the rocks held the memory of proximity and trembling hands. Ahead of them, the night was coming, and with it, something neither of them was ready for. She waited until she thought he was asleep. Dalton heard her rise, heard the whisper of leather against stone as she gathered what little she had. He kept his breathing even, kept his eyes closed, gave her the chance to leave. But when her footsteps began to fade into the darkness, something in him couldn't let her go. Not like this. Not injured and alone with nothing but stars to guide her. He was on his feet and moving before he'd made a conscious choice to follow. She heard him coming, broke into a run despite the wound, despite the darkness, despite everything that said. Running was a bad idea. Dalton ran too. His legs were longer, his body undamaged. He caught her before she'd made it 50 yards. His hand closed around her wrist. She spun, and suddenly they were grappling in the dark. All pretense of civility gone. She was stronger than he'd expected. Wilder. Her knee came up toward his ribs, but he twisted away. She tried to wrench free, but he held on. "Let me go," she hissed. "You'll die. Out there. That's my choice. Is it? Or are you just running because it's easier than staying?" The words hit something in her. She stopped struggling for breath. Just a single moment of stillness. And in that moment, everything changed. They were standing too close. His hands were on her wrists, pinning them gently but firmly. Her chest was heaving against his. He could feel her heart pounding, could feel his own matching the rhythm. The night air between them felt charged like before lightning strikes. "Let go," she said. Again, but her voice had changed, gone quiet, almost a whisper. "No, why not?" He couldn't answer. Didn't know how to explain the feeling that letting her walk away now would be worse than anything that had come before. That somehow in the space of a single day, she'd become something he couldn't just forget. Kiona was looking up at him, and in the moonlight, her eyes held things he didn't have names for. Not just anger. Now, something else, something that made breathing difficult. "You don't get to. Keep me safe," she said. "That's not yours to do." "I know." "Then why are you still holding me?" Dalton loosened his grip, but he didn't let go completely. His hand slid from her wrist to her forearms, gentle now instead of restraining. She could have pulled away, should have pulled away. "She didn't move because you haven't asked me to stop," he said. The admission hung between them, dangerous and true. Kiona's breathing had gone shallow. He could feel the pulse in her wrists racing under his fingers. "I hate you," she said, but there was no conviction in it. "I know. I don't trust you. I know. That too." "Then what were we doing?" It was the same question from earlier asked. Different asked in darkness with their bodies too close and all their defenses stripped away by exhaustion and heat and something neither wanted to name. "I don't know," Dalton said honestly. Kiona tilted her head, studying him. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted one hand and placed it against his chest, not pushing him away, just resting there, feeling his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. "It's fast," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "You know why?" She did. He could see it in her eyes, in the way her fingers curled slightly against him. She knew exactly what she did to him. Had probably known since that first moment when he touched her wrists to free them. "This is a mistake," she said. "Probably. We're from different worlds." "I know. If my people found you with me, they'd end you where you stood. Worth the risk." That made her laugh. Sharp and bitter, but still a laugh. Her hand was still on his chest. His hands were still on her arms. Neither of them moved away. "You're a fool," she said. "Been called worse by smarter women, I'd guess." Now, it was his turn to almost smile. "Few as smart as you." Kiona shook her head, but something in her expression had softened. Not surrender, but maybe recognition that whatever this was between them, it wasn't going away just because they both wanted it to. "I should go," she said. "You should, but I'm not going to." "No." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was so low he almost didn't hear it. "Not tonight." Dalton let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Released her arms, but didn't step back. She lowered her hand from his chest. Slowly, like it was the hardest thing she'd ever done. They stood there in the moonlight, not touching anymore, but not separate either. The space between them hummed with everything they weren't saying. "Tomorrow," she finally said. "I leave tomorrow." "All right, I mean it. I believe you." He didn't. And from the look in her eyes, she didn't believe herself either. They walked back to camp side by side, still not touching still, maintaining that careful distance. But something had shifted. Some wall had come down, even as others went up. When they lay down to sleep, they were closer than before. Close enough that he could hear her breathing. Close enough that she could hear his. Close enough that neither of them slept much at all. The stars came out like holes punched in black canvas, letting light bleed through from somewhere beyond. Dalton sat with his back against a boulder, watching them appear one by one. Kiona sat across from him, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the fiction. That distance still mattered. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Do what? Wander alone? Help people who don't want help. Follow women who tell you to leave." Dalton was quiet for a long time. The night pressed in around them, fast and indifferent. He'd never told anyone what he was about to tell her. Didn't know why he was telling her now, except that lying felt worse than the truth. "I was a soldier once," he said years back. Before the territories opened up, Kiona didn't respond, but he felt her attention sharpen, felt her listening in a way that made the words come easier. "We got orders to move through Apache land, relocate anyone we found, use force if necessary." He paused, the memory bitter in his mouth. It was always necessary. The silence stretched. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see what might be in her eyes. There was a village, small, mostly women and old ones. The warriors were away hunting. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. The only way he could get through it. "My captain said we were securing the area, making it safe for settlers. And were you?" Her voice was soft but sharp as a blade. "No." The word came out broken. "We were clearing it, burning it, taking anything valuable and destroying the rest." He heard her breathing change, heard the moment she understood what he was really saying. "I followed orders," he continued. "Told myself I was just doing my job, that someone else would do it if I didn't. All the things cowards tell themselves when they don't want to see what they've become." "How many?" she asked. "Too many." "How many?" The question was a demand now. She wanted the full weight of it, wanted him to carry it in words and not just silence. 17, he said. 17 people who never raised a hand against us, who just wanted to be left alone. The number sat between them like a corpse. Kiona was very still. He risked a glance at her and found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not hate, not forgiveness, something more complicated. "That's why you help people now," she said. "You think you can balance the scales? I know I can't." "Then why?" "Because doing nothing is worse." Kiona tilted her head, studying him in the starlight. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not softer, but maybe less sharp. "You think I'm your redemption?" "No." He met her eyes. "I think you're just someone who needed help, and I'm just someone who happened to be there." Liar. But there was no anger in it this time, almost fondness. "Maybe," he admitted. She stood, then moved around. The small fire they'd built came to sit beside him instead of across from him. Not touching, but close. Close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. "The village," she said quietly. "What happened to the warriors when they came back?" Dalton closed his eyes. "They found what was left. Tracked us for 3 days. We lost 4 men before we got away." Good. The word should have stung. Instead, it felt like absolution. "I left after that," he said. "Deserted. Been wandering ever since, trying to find something worth a living." "And have you found it?" He looked at her then. Really looked at her. The way the firelight caught in her eyes. The way she sat like she was carved from stone and fire both. The way she'd fought him and challenged him and never once made it easy. "Maybe," he said. Kiona held his gaze. Something passed between them in that look. Understanding. Maybe, or recognition that they were both damaged in ways that couldn't be fixed, but might be understood. "I should hate you," she said. "You should for what you did, what your people did." "Yes, but I don't," she said. It like a confession, like something she wished wasn't true. "I should, but I don't." Dalton didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if there was anything to say. Kiona leaned against him then, just slightly. just her shoulder against his. The smallest gesture of trust he'd ever received and the largest gift he'd ever been given. They sat like that, under the stars, not speaking, not moving, just existing in the same space, carrying their separate weights together. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Tomorrow I still leave. I know. Tonight, though, she didn't finish. Didn't need to. Tonight, they could pretend that different worlds didn't matter, that history didn't matter, that anything was possible if you wanted it badly enough. Tonight, they could be just two people under stars that didn't judge. Tomorrow would take care of itself. Dawn was still an hour away when Dalton heard the horses, distant but getting closer. 3 riders moving fast across open ground, their pace steady and purposeful, not travelers, hunters. He was on his feet instantly. Kiona woke at his movement, already reaching for her knife before her eyes fully opened. That's how you survived, he thought. Never fully asleep, never fully safe. Riders, he whispered, coming from the west. She was up and listening. After a moment, she nodded. I hear them. Your people, maybe. Her expression was unreadable in the pre-dawn darkness. Or the men who'd chained me come back for what they left. Either option was bad. If it was her people and they found her with him, they'd assume the worst. If it was the traitors, they'd try to finish what they started. Both scenarios ended in violence. There, Dalton pointed to an outcrop of rock 30 yards away, a narrow gap in the stone barely wide enough for 2 people. We can hide there until they pass. They moved fast and quiet. The gap was even smaller than it looked, forcing them to press inside sideways. Kiona went first. Dalton followed, and suddenly they were wedged together in darkness with barely room to breathe. His chest was against her back. Her body was pressed along the length of his from shoulder to hip. Every breath she took, he felt. Every slight shift of her weight sent awareness through him like electricity. Don't move, he breathed against her ear. She nodded, but the movement made her press closer. His arms came up instinctively, bracketing her on either side, hands flat against the stone to keep from touching her more than necessary. But necessary was already more than he could handle. The riders were closer now. He could hear their voices, rough and speaking a language he didn't understand. Kiona went rigid at the sound. The traitors, she whispered, so quiet he almost didn't hear. They were searching, spreading out to cover more ground. One of them was heading straight for their hiding place. Dalton's hand moved without thinking, covering Kiona's mouth gently, not to silence her, but to keep any sound from escaping if she reacted. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her cheek brushing against his palm. The rider passed within 10 feet of them, so close Dalton could smell the horse, could hear the creak of leather and the man muttering curses under his breath. They stayed frozen, barely breathing, pressed together so tightly there was no space left between them. Kiona's heart was pounding. Dalton could feel it against his chest, rapid as a bird's wings. Or maybe that was his own heart. Hard to tell when they were this close. The rider moved on, started to circle back, and then Kiona shifted, not away from Dalton, toward him. She turned in the narrow space, a movement that should have been impossible, but somehow wasn't. Now they were face to face, her front pressed against his, her breath hot against his throat. She was looking up at him in the darkness. He could barely see her eyes, but he felt the weight of her gaze. Why are you still here? She whispered, echoing her question from before, but the meaning was different now. Not why was he following her? Why was he risking his life for her? You know why? He whispered back. Her hand found his chest. Again, rested there over his heart, like she was checking to see if it was still racing. It was. They'll come back, she said. I know. If they find us together, they'll try to end both of us. Let them try. She shook her head. but there was something almost tender in the gesture. Fool! You're fool. The words came out. Before he could stop them. Too much truth. Too raw. But Kiona didn't pull away. Didn't mock him. Just kept her. Hand on his heart and her eyes on his face. We can't stay here, she said. Not yet. They're still close. I don't mean the rocks. Her voice dropped even lower. I mean this us whatever this is. I know it doesn't have a future. I know that too. Then why does it feel like it matters? Dalton didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he had too many answers and none of them made sense. How do you explain that a single day can change everything? That someone you met at dawn can be essential by dusk? Outside, the riders were regrouping, arguing about which direction to search next. Their voices carried frustration. They'd lost the trail. They'll give up soon, Dalton said. Move on to easier prey. And then, what? Then we do what we planned. You go your way, I go mine. Just like that. Just like that. But neither of them moved. Neither of them created space. They stayed pressed together in the darkness, listening to the riders argue and eventually decide to head south. Listened as the sound of hooves faded. Listened as silence returned to the desert. Still, it didn't move. We should go, Kiona finally said. Yes now. Yes. But she didn't pull away. And Dalton didn't let go of the stone walls that kept him from holding her properly. They stayed in that impossible space between wanting and wisdom, between what was and what could never be. When they finally emerged into the growing light, something had changed. The distance between them felt smaller. The inevitability of separation felt heavier. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. And neither of them said what they were both thinking, that they were running out of time. They reached the ridge at midday. Beyond it, the land dropped away in a territory Dalton had never crossed. Apache country, her country, where he couldn't follow. Even if she asked, she didn't ask. Kiona stood at the edge, looking out over the vast expanse of canyons and messes that stretched to the horizon. Home was out there somewhere. Her people, her life before chains, and traders, and a cowboy who didn't understand that helping could be another form of taking. This is where we part, she said. Dalton stood a few paces back, giving her space. The wind pulled at her hair, carrying it away from her face. He memorized the sight, knew he'd never see anything like it again. You could come with me, he said, and immediately regretted it. She turned and the look in. Her eyes was almost pitying. To where? Your world? Where I'd always be the Apache woman you saved. Where every kindness would be a reminder that I needed saving. It wouldn't be like that. It would always be like that. She moved closer. You know it would. He did know. Had known from the moment he cut those chains that there was no version of this, where they ended up together. Different worlds didn't just mean different places. They meant different futures that couldn't exist side by side. I could follow you. He tried. Keep my distance. Just make sure you get home safe. And then what? You think my people would welcome you? You think I could face them with a white man trailing behind me like a shadow? She shook her head. That's not freedom, Dalton. That's just a longer chain. The truth of it hit him like a fist. Everything he'd done, every attempt to help had been about his needs, not hers, his guilt, his redemption, his desire to be the hero of a story that wasn't his to tell. You were right, he said quietly. That first morning, what you said to me, I said a lot of things. You said you'd rather die than be mine. He met her eyes. You were right, because being mine was never the freedom I thought I was giving you. Kiona's expression softened. She closed the distance between them until they were standing as close as they'd been in the hiding place. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Close enough to count her breaths. You're learning, she said. Too late. No. She reached up, touched his face with her fingertips. Right on time. Then she kissed him. It was nothing like he'd imagined. Not gentle, not sweet. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the things they couldn't say. Full of goodbye and thank you and I wish. Full of what might have been if the world was different. If they were different. When she pulled back, there were no tears, just clarity. This is where I choose, she said. Not where you let me go. Where I choose to go. The distinction mattered. He saw that now. Letting her go implied he'd been holding on. Her choosing meant she'd always been free, even when chained. Especially then. What? Will you tell your people? He asked. The truth. That I was taken. That I freed. Myself. That a fool of a cowboy helped me survive long enough to make it home. A small smile touched her lips. They'll probably want to track you down and thank you properly. I'll make sure to head the other direction. Smart man. They stood there for another moment, neither willing to be the first to step away. Then Kiona did what she'd done. From the beginning, made the hard choice without hesitation. She turned and started walking. Didn't look back. Didn't wave. Just walked away into her world while he stayed in his. Dalton watched until she disappeared into the canyons. Watched until there was nothing left to see but heat shimmer and empty sky. Then he turned and started walking. The other way. He'd come out here looking for redemption. Found something better instead. Understanding. She'd taught him that freedom wasn't something you gave. It was something you recognized someone already had. That helping meant respecting their right to refuse your help. That the highest form of love was letting go completely. The chains he'd cut that morning had been metal. Easy to break. The chains he'd cut today were his own. Harder to see, harder to acknowledge, but just as necessary to break. Dalton walked alone into the afternoon sun. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere behind him, Kiona was finding her way home. Somewhere ahead, he'd find his own path. They'd never see each other again. Both of them knew it, and that was exactly as it should be. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where choices and consequences collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider Super Chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything.